Guardian, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 1. Number 4 Bright Avenue. It was the 15th of July in the lunar calendar, and the sky was still gloomy. Nocturnal cats, big and small, had all returned to their resting places. Everything seemed awfully quiet, even in the wide avenue of Dragon City, with only the occasional buzzing of a bug from the bushes, elusive and bewildered, heightened with anticipation. It was 2:30 in the morning. The morning dew had settled and the air was damp. It was wet and sticky. Perhaps it was the wind, but there always seemed to be a shadow lurking in the corner. When one walked down the avenue, it was as though something was constantly glaring from behind. At present, Guo Changcheng found himself entering number 4 Bright Avenue while carrying a document of notice. Guo Changcheng's parents had died when he was young. His looks were mediocre, and his character was introverted and cowardly. Suffice to say, he wasn't born capable. Fortunately, his two aunts were quite nice to him, having taken care of him until he had graduated from university. Unfortunately, Guo Changcheng failed to live up to any expectations. He had struggled to graduate from a low-tier university, with rather mediocre grades at that. Even now, despite being an adult, whenever he met any strangers, he was always tongue-tied and afraid. As one would expect, Guo Changcheng could not find a job. After he graduated, he wasted almost a year at home, slacking. Eventually, when his uncle was transferred to the Ministry of Public Security, his uncle made use of a few connections to get his lackluster nephew a job. And so Guo Changcheng thought that his future would consist of working from 9 to 5 in a uniform, making tea for important people, and playing solitaire whenever he was free. That was until he received a bizarre recruitment notice. When the notice arrived, Guo Changcheng thought there was some sort of mistake. The notice, written in big, red letters stated, "Comrade Guo Changcheng. Congratulations. You have been recruited by our department. Here, you will enjoy the treatment and status of a national civil servant, with an above-average salary. You will also be responsible for serving the people. We hope that you will work hard, with both passion and ambition, for the good of our nation and society. Please bring this notice and your identity card, and report to our office at 2:30 a.m. on August 31st, July 15th lunar calendar. Our address, Human Resources Department, 1/F, number 4 Bright Avenue. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you as our new comrade on behalf of all our staff. Ministry of Public Security of the People's Republic of China. Special Investigations Unit." Normally, when someone sees such a strange reporting time, they would expect it to be a typo, and would probably call in for confirmation. But Guo Changcheng, being the antisocial freak he was, had a rather peculiar case of telephone phobia. Even the thought of having to make a phone call left him sleepless all night. And so, he never made the phone call. After a bit of thought, Guo Changcheng came up with the perfect plan. He would stay up all night and go to number 4 Bright Avenue at 2:30 in the morning. If there was no one there, he would take a nap at a McDonald's not far away and come back at 2:30 in the afternoon. He figured that either one of these two times must be the right one. Since at this hour the metro was not in service, Guo Changcheng had no choice but to drive. Struggling, and with the help of his GPS, he finally managed to find the place. Number 4 Bright Avenue was, in fact, not so bright, but rather hidden in a secluded courtyard. Guo Changcheng stopped for a while, hesitating at the entrance, then turned on the flashlight in his phone. He found a small sign underneath the lush Japanese ivy with the building number on it. Below the sign was a small engraving on the rock, which read Special Investigations Unit. There was even the emblem of the MPS, Ministry of Public Security, beneath it. The courtyard was flourishing with vegetation. There was a line of Japanese pagoda trees past the car park, forming a small grove. Among the trees was a narrow path which led to a small reception hut and an old office building. The lights were on in the small hut, and a uniformed figure could be seen inside it. The figure wore a service cap and appeared to be reading a newspaper. Guo Changcheng took a deep breath and started to sweat nervously, without giving much thought as to why the reception office would be open at this hour. I am reporting in as a new recruit, this is my notice letter. I am reporting in as a new recruit, this is my notice letter. I am reporting in as a new recruit, this is my notice letter. Guo Changcheng, still rooted in the same spot, recited his lines as though he was a skukid preparing for an exam. Finally, he gathered his courage and shakily knocked on the window of the reception hut, and feebly muttered, I am reporting in as a new notice, this is my letter recruit. What? Asked the bewildered, middle-aged man at the reception. He was screwed, how could he mess up a line as simple as that? Almost in tears, his face began to look like a purple yam. Fortunately, the man spotted the notice letter and realized what he was here for. Oh. You're the newbie. What should I call you? Oh, I see it, little Guo, huh? We haven't had a newcomer for quite a few years now. So, how's it going? I suppose this place wasn't that easy to find. Guo Changcheng nodded in agreement, feeling relieved. He liked meeting friendly and eager people. The more talkative the other person was, the less he would have to say. So this is your first day, huh? Let me tell you, you're extremely lucky today. It just so happens that our chief is here tonight. Come on, I will introduce you to everyone. Guo Changcheng tensed up in an instant, not feeling lucky in the least. Guo Changcheng was particularly afraid of people with high status and power. When he was little, whenever he saw a teacher he'd start to curl up, and would turn around and run for his life if he ever saw the principal. Albeit a law-abiding citizen, when he saw a policeman, it was as if he was a rat seeing a cat. Meeting the chief? He'd rather meet ghosts. At this moment, a young man came striding out of the small office building. The man, with his hands buried in his pockets, had a cigarette in his mouth. He had a tall and slender figure, with upright shoulders and thick eyebrows, along with deep eye sockets and a high nose. Extremely handsome, and yet extremely somber. With a frown and a quick pace, his body seems to be saying, no matter who you are, get out of my way. Guo Changcheng inadvertently found himself looking at him, and was immediately stunned by a set of beautiful, yet abrasive, eyes. This handsome man seemed to be quite ill-tempered. Surprisingly, when the handsome man noticed that someone was standing by the doorway, he made an abrupt stop, and within a split second, put on the most genuine and cordial smile possible. When he smiled, two soft dimples appeared on his cheeks, and his mouth curved up, with the cigarette still held in it. His eyes shrunk into even steeper curves, amiable yet with a hint of mischief. Well, speak of the devil. Hey kid, go meet our chief. The middle-aged man gave Guo Changcheng a push from behind, making him almost stumble and fall. His mind went blank as he heard a voice from behind say, Chief Zhao Yunlan, we have a newcomer today. Hello, A warm welcome to you. Zhao Yunlan eagerly extended his hand. Half paralyzed, Guo Changcheng tried to wipe off the sweat on his hands and embarrassingly picked the wrong hand for a handshake. He quickly withdrew his hand. The nerve-wracking experience left his short-sleeved shirt soaked in sweat, slowly forming a world map on his back. Zhao Yunlan, letting out a very restrained laugh, naturally raised his hand to give Guo Changcheng a pat on the shoulder. No need to be so nervous, our colleagues are all very nice and friendly. Since it's your first day, I really should walk you around, but you see, today happens to be a special day, and we're extremely busy, so please don't feel left out. We will hold a welcome party for you sometime later. Well, this isn't a very convenient time, is it? How about this? Old Wu will bring you inside to meet Wang Zheng, our HR manager. She will help you with the employment procedures. After that, you can go back and get some rest and come back tomorrow morning. Does that sound good? Guo Changcheng nervously nodded. No matter how desperately hurried Zhao Yunlan seemed to be a moment ago, the fact that he was currently standing still, talking to Guo Changcheng in his calm and stately manner was remarkable. Sorry, I'm in a hurry. If there is anything you need, you can tell me when I get back. No need to be shy, we're a family now. Sorry for troubling you today. Zhao Yunlan gave Guo Changcheng a gentle, apologetic smile, nodded towards Old Wu at the reception, and rushed off in a hurry. Old Wu was certainly a big fan of Zhao Yunlan. Just a few rather meaningless words of formality had gotten him into a good mood instantly. He took Guo Changcheng towards the office whilst muttering, "Our chief is young, capable, well-tempered, and always kind and genuine towards everyone." Guo Changcheng had yet to recover from the horror of meeting the big chief, and only vaguely heard Old Wu. Since he was always terrified of making direct eye contact, he hadn't noticed that Old Wu's face was as pale as a wall, his lips blood red, his mouth almost wide enough to reach his earlobes, and that he had no tongue. The office was full of busy people, it seemed to be a really hectic time. It is only until this moment when Guo Changcheng finally realized that there was something strange about this office. Why would the whole office, including the receptionist, be working overtime till this hour? No worries, Old Wu explains, you will mostly be working during daytime in the future. As long as there aren't any big cases, we rarely have to work overtime. But since it's July, only these couple of days are the most hectic in the year for us. Don't be concerned though. Overtime pays 3 times the usual salary and you'll even get a bonus at the end of the month. Guo Changcheng was even more perplexed. What's with that only these couple of days are the most hectic in a year for us? Do criminals pick this time of the year to commit crimes? And they follow the lunar calendar too? However, Guo Changcheng, fearing that he'd appear stupid, left his questions to himself and nodded instead. Old Wu continued, I usually work the night shift, another colleague manages the reception in the daytime. Ah, I guess we won't really get to see each other much in the future. Have you just graduated? From which university? What did you study? Guo Changcheng shamefully admitted his rather disappointing and lackluster academic achievements, adding, with the voice of a mosquito, I'm not very good with studying. Well, you're still a university graduate nonetheless. I like educated young people since I wasn't that capable myself. When I was young, my family was poor, so I never got the chance to get a proper education. When I was around 7 or 8, I studied at a private school for just a short while. But after all these years, I've forgotten almost all the stuff that I'd learned, I can barely read the newspaper now. What stuff? Private school? Guo Changcheng was once again confused, but because of the fear that he would appear stupid, he kept it to himself. "Oh, we're here." Old Wu cheered. Guo Changcheng lifted his head up to see a giant sign that read Human Resources on the door, written with red letters on a white plane, being a very eerie red as well. Guo Changcheng pondered why this red seemed so strange and suspicious, and to his surprise, he realized that the words look as if they were written with dried blood. Old Wu knocked on the door. "Little Wang, are you in? We have a newcomer today. Can I trouble you to complete his employment procedures?" After a moment of silence, a very soft female voice replied, "I'm coming." The voice seemed very far away, and yet also seemed as if it was floating just beside one's ears. Guo Changcheng immediately felt a chill running down his spine. "Sorry for troubling you at this time of day, little Guo, but you see, little Wang is just like me. We can only do night shifts, so employment procedures can only be carried out around this time." Hold on. What did he meant by "can only do night shifts"? Guo Changcheng felt increasingly uncomfortable, and another wave of frost rushed through his bones. Trembling with fear, he glanced at a worker passing by, and was instantly mesmerized with horror. Guo Changcheng clearly saw the uniformed worker swiftly gliding in mid-air through the corridor. He didn't have any legs. The door opened with a screeching squeak, and a young girl in a white dress appeared at the door and eerily asked, "Have you brought the notice letter and your identity card?" A burst of chilling breeze came rushing out of the room. Guo Changcheng felt as if his heart was about to burst and stop beating. He was afraid that if he didn't speak now, he might not be able to speak again for the rest of his life. He held his breath and slowly lifted his head, gazing across the spotless white dress, stopping at the girl's bare neck. A second later, Guo Changcheng let out a croaking noise as though he was being choked. His jaw hung open, but he couldn't produce a single scream. His eyes looked as though they were about to pop out, his limbs petrified as he slowly stumbled backwards as if his body was no longer his. He saw a red line running across the girl's neck. It wasn't a necklace, but rather a line that was deeply sunk into her skin, a tightly sewn line that stitched her head to her neck. An icy hand rested on Guo Changcheng's shoulder, and old Wu asked, "Yo, little Guo, you doing okay?" Guo Changcheng turned around and saw old Wu's pale paper face and humongous mouth. Meeting the chief? He'd rather meet ghosts. Perhaps this was karma paying back. 2 seconds later, Guo Changcheng passed out without a sound. His frozen body lay straight on the floor. His uncle really had found him a remarkable job. End of the chapter. Chapter 2. Sundial of Reincarnation Part 1. The street lights flickered like fireflies in the wind, and darkness reigned over the light in the dismal and dreary night. A young girl's staggering steps bashed at the bumpy brick road. Suddenly, she tripped and heavily fell on her knees. In the suffocating heat of a summer's night, Li Qian panted and puffed vigorously, her fingers tightly clutching her clothes. She could hear the thumping of her heartbeat, along with the thumping of someone else's footsteps. The noise seemed to originate from a pair of old, soft-soled cloth shoes, and the wearer seemed to be stumbling due to a leg disability. Li Qian abruptly looked behind her, but there was nothing in her sight besides the small, swiveling insects floating around the street lamp. She had a delicate look, and would have normally been considered pretty. However, her hair now clung uncomfortably to her face, messy and soaked in sweat, and her cheeks and lips were becoming paler by the minute. Her current state was far from her natural beauty. Gradually, her expression became strangely unsettling, almost like an evil smirk or a malicious glare, with a remarkable yet indescribable hint of pure terror. "Go away." She bolted up and said, grinding her teeth, "If I can get rid of you once, I can get rid of you twice." The footsteps stopped. Ch01 rolled up her sleeves, her snow-white arms now covered with goosebumps. In the cooking heat of summer, something invisible was making her cold. She picked up a brick from the ground as the footsteps closed in on her from all directions like a swarm of bone-devouring maggots. Yet, there was still nothing within her sights. The unseen was the most terrifying. Ch01 began to scream as she smashed and bludgeoned the air with the brick. The brick began to grow heavier and the coarse surface pained her palm. Exhausted, her eyes grew dark. Hunchbacked, her arms rested on her crooked knees. Puffing and panting, she inadvertently stared at the ground. Ch01's irises began to narrow and her entire body began to tremble with vigor. The brick in her hand dropped to the ground, plunging onto her toes through her sandals. But as though she had not felt the pain at all, she stumbled backwards, her knees bent, she crashed down, sitting on the ground. A shadow, it's a shadow. The street lamp was directly in front of her, so how was a shadow cast despite nothing blocking the light? The shadow looked like black ink spattered across the ground and the figure watched her for God knows how long. Ch01 was paralyzed on the ground, but the shadowy figure was standing upright. "If you haven't done anything wrong, why are you so terrified by a shadow?" She seemed to hear a screeching laughter. It was dawn, almost 5 o'clock, the phone on the bedside drawer rang with a ghastly howl. Zhao Yunlan had worked overtime from dusk till dawn, and when he got home, he simply rolled right into bed without even taking his clothes off. Yet, just as he had gotten himself comfortable, the phone had more work for him. He opened his eyes blandly, his double eyelids drooping heavily and stared at the ceiling in contempt. After 3 seconds, he rose like a zombie, struggling to hold up his squishy brain, and reached for his cell phone. Zhao Yunlan's room was remarkably chaotic, it was even worse than a dog's lair. His clothes were scattered everywhere, both on the bed and the floor. Nobody knew whether they were meant to be washed or worn. The big twin bed had all sorts of miscellaneous objects on it, some being of rather unimaginable sorts, a single sock wrapped around the corner of a laptop, a pair of sunglasses, an umbrella, an origami top hat, and a whole can of cinnabar powder. With all these piles of garbage cramming up the space, there was only a tiny spot large enough for a single person to sleep on. Zhao Yunlan wore an incredibly resentful expression, looking as if he was just about to burst out swearing. When he picked up the phone, though, his tone was awfully normal, perhaps having gotten used to this kind of life. "What's happened now?" "Someone died," Wang Zheng's voice came from the other side. "When?" "Last night or this morning, just a while ago." "Where?" "University Street." Zhao Yunlan ran a hand across his face, "Let old Chu take care of it." Chu Shizi went on a business trip to Xiangzi. "What about Lin Zheng?" "Got transferred by hell." "Fuck me." "What about Zhu Hong?" "Oh, never mind, there was a full moon yesterday, she must be on leave." "Who else is at work?" "Me, but it's almost sunrise so I have got to go soon," said Wang Zheng. "There's still De Qing and the new intern Guo Chang. Zhao Yunlan feebly yawned, and said, "Tell De Qing to go with the intern, give him a chance to learn." "Guo Chang can't go anywhere right now," Wang Zheng explained. "When he came over last night, he passed out on the floor and he's still unconscious." Zhao Yunlan asked, "What scared him?" "Old Wu and I." Wang Zheng even added, I told you to find a professional shroud shop to make old Wu a new body. What Zhu Hong makes with sandbags and paper can never look like an actual person. Zhao Yunlan silently sat on the edge of the bed and slowly sighed. It's against procedure for me to go there in person, it might scare others, but I guess I have no choice. Fine, tell De Qing to wait for me. I'm coming. He hung up, showered in 3 minutes, and sped towards University Street in his car. Zhao Yunlan slowed down right around the corner, and a black shadow suddenly fell from the sky. A round ball of animal fur came crashing down like a grenade, almost leaving a crater on the front of the car. He swiftly slammed the brakes, rolled down the window and yelled, "This is called an automobile. It's a transportation device, not your litter box. Don't try to break it, will you?" On the front of the car sat a pitch-black cat, so fat and round that it seemed to have no neck, possibly being the African cousin of Garfield. The big, fat cat looked around, and after making sure that there was no one around, flicked its whiskers, and said, "Stop babbling and get out. Haven't you noticed that smell?" The air was filled with an inexplicable foul odor like that of a bioweapon. Covering his nose, Zhao Yunlan got out of the car and asked the cat, "Did you just fart? What's that smell?" Ignoring his remarks, the black cat jumped off the car and started walking ahead. A few police cars had already stopped by the side of the road, and a police line had been set up at the entrance of a small narrow alley. Zhao Yunlan rummaged his pockets, and, after a long while, finally managed to locate a scruffy staff card. The policeman guarding the tape didn't look too well. He quickly glanced at Zhao Yunlan's card and returned it, and then rushed off to a wall and started vomiting. Zhao Yunlan scratched his bird's nest of a head, bewildered, "Is my photo really that nauseating?" The cat, who was walking quite some distance ahead of him, impatiently turned back and urged him with a long and angry meow. "Right, right, the important stuff. Damn, this smell. I can't even stand 10 steps." Zhao Yunlan crouched down and crossed the police line. Zhao Yunlan had just arrived, yet someone already seemed to have been waiting for him. "Are you from the Special Investigations Unit?" In the Ministry of Public Security, everyone knew of the enigmatic department called the Special Investigations Unit. They certainly were not low-tier officers, but nobody knew what exactly it was that they did. Every time someone from the Special Investigations Unit, was involved, it was always by the orders of the higher authorities, and nobody could object. But if they weren't present, nobody would know where to find them. They belonged to the MPS, but weren't always closely monitored. They were strictly organized and their procedures were completely non-transparent. If the media didn't have official approval, they would never have been able to locate the let alone interview or report anything about them. To be honest, nobody knew how they did things. When a case is handed to the it was as if it was entering a black box, and the only thing that came out was a mysterious report. Sometimes, staff members from the were even more baffling than the most bewildering of cases. Their case reports were always detailed, logical, and impeccable, giving a full account of the entire process of solving the case and catching the criminals involved. But there was one aspect that was unceasingly suspicious: the criminals always died by the end of the case. While most of the cases they handled involved heinous crimes where most of the suspects most probably deserved such demise, it was perhaps a little too coincidental. The police officer in charge of the investigation was a senior policeman named Yang. He offered Zhao Yunlan a friendly handshake and sized him up curiously. "What should I call you?" "Zhao Yunlan. You can just call me Little Zhao." Old Yang was quite taken aback. Never would he have thought that this young man was the chief of the Sioux. He gave Zhao Yunlan an even closer look and realized that he was tall, slender, and handsome, like a model from a fashion advertisement. Though it must be said that his outfit was not very pleasing, a scruffy shirt which was half buttoned up, only half of it tucked in while the other half not, and not to mention that bird's nest of a hairstyle. But Chief Zhao Yunlan was the chief after all. No matter how messy he looked, even if he ran naked on the street, lower-tier officers would probably have to praise him for trend-setting. "Oh dear," exclaimed old Yang. "You're Chief Zhao? Excuse me for my ignorance. Who would have thought our chief is so young and accomplished?" Zhao Yunlan was rather used to flattery, and naturally replied with some utterance of formality. At this moment, someone was growing rather impatient, and a loud and clear meow could be heard. Old Yang looked down and saw a black shadow which swiftly climbed up Zhao Yunlan's pants, shirt, and onto his shoulder. Normally, seeing a black cat with green eyes at a crime scene would be rather ominous, but this particular cat was just a bit too plump, which instead seemed to lighten up the situation rather than darken it. Old Yang stared at it and it stared right back. This. Zhao Yunlan embarrassingly adjusted his pants, which were almost pulled off by the cat, and laughed. "This is our cat manager. He is really hard-working, so he doesn't like it when we chit-chat during work." Old Yang was left speechless. The black cat arrogantly stretched its neck, albeit with difficulty due to its sheer size, and impatiently swung its tail. Zhao Yunlan got the message and showed old Yang the little badge sported around the cat's neck. "This is a Sioux special permit. It's basically equivalent to our staff cards. Don't worry, he is an experienced cat, so he knows his way around." Old Yang began to find this whole ordeal rather nonsensical. A moment later, Chief Zhao carried the cat and followed old Yang into the crime scene. The further they went, the nastier the smell got. A female corpse laid in the narrow alley, wearing a t-shirt with Dragon City University orientation camp printed on it. Her eyes and mouth were open. Her body laid flat in the shape of a star and her stomach had been cut open and emptied. Old Yang covered his nose with a paper towel, visibly disturbed. The fat cat on Zhao Yunlan's shoulder let out a long meow, leapt onto the ground, and circled the corpse twice. It then stopped beside the corpse, sat down, and stared at Zhao Yunlan like a well-trained search dog. Zhao Yunlan walked towards the corpse, took out a pair of scruffy gloves from his ragged pocket, and put them on. He examined the spot the cat was sitting on and carefully lifted up one of the corpse's arms. Old Yang, leaning forward for a closer look, saw a bloody hand mark on the floor. That definitely couldn't be a human's hand. The palm was only the size of a child's hand, yet the fingers were at least 20 centimeters long. Old Yang had been a policeman practically his entire life, and he'd never seen anything so bizarre. While Old Yang was still stupefied, Zhao Yunlan remarked in a serious tone, "From this point onward, the Sioux will be in charge of this case. The handover procedures will be completed in 2 working days." Old Yang never got the chance to reply as Zhao Yunlan pointed towards a dilapidated door and asked, "What's this place?" End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.